ADO.NET is the core library for accessing data from relational and ODBC databases. There are a number of specialized namespaces, but for today's example, I'm going to use the SQL client classes. I'm going to start by showing you some basic ADO.NET code. I'll show you how to connect to a database. We'll execute queries against the database using the command object, and then I'll show you how to store data in a local cache known as a dataset. I'm inside Visual Studio, and I've opened a solution called Working with ADO. Inside that is a project that already contains a database called northwind.mdf, and it contains a form, form1.cs. If I open up this user interface, I'll see that there are 3 buttons and 1 list box. I'm going to start by showing you how to connect to the database. I'll do that by double-clicking on this Connect button, which will take me to my C# code. To get a little more screen real estate, I'm going to close this output window on the bottom of the screen. Before you do anything with the database, you need to create a connection. I'm going to use this class called SQL Connection. I then need to provide a connection string that explains all the details about where to find the database. In my case, it's going to look in a folder called Data Directory, and it's going to look for a file called northwind.mdf. To open the connection, I'll take my connection object and call open. To close the connection, I'll call the close method. And then to verify that the connection is open, I'm going to type in messagebox.show, and then I'm going to ask the connection for its current state. Like this line of code. And then I'll copy this message box code and paste it after the con.close. I'm going to press F5 to run the application, and then say yes to this dialog. And then if I did everything correctly, when I click on this Connect to Database, I see the open dialog, and then immediately after that I see the close dialog. Once you've opened the connection, you can instruct the database to manipulate the data. You're probably familiar with the 4 basic operations you can do in a database, sometimes called the CRUD operations. You can create data, read the data, update the data, or delete the data. In SQL, we use the insert, select, update, and delete queries. So what I'm going to do on this second button click procedure down here is I'm going to open my connection, and then I'm going to declare a command object. Next, I specify the command text that I want to send over to the database. This will be my SQL text. So I'll say select star from shippers, which is the table I'm interested in. And then I'm going to tell the command object to use the connection to talk to the database. Like so. Now the rest of this code, I'm going to uncomment, Control-K, Control-U. This executes the reader against the database, which is going to return some rows. I check to see if there are any rows in the reader. If there are rows, then I call read, which gives me the first piece of data. And then I call reader.getSQLString, and I go get the column with the number 1 from the data. That's the first column of data, and I'm going to add that to the list box. And then I have this while loop that continues to read until it's empty. Then I close the reader, and then down here I've got another query against the database. I'm going to do a update query. So I have another command text where I'm going to call this update shippers, set company name or shipper ID, and then I'm going to create a random number here. And then I'll execute that query. I don't need to iterate over the results because I'm inserting data or updating the data into the database. I'll run this application, press F5. And there's our shipper data. For my last demo, I want to talk about the data set. ADO contains this class called the data set. This acts like an in-memory, disconnected representation of your database. Like a database, a data set can contain data tables consisting of rows and columns. You can also define data relationships, constraints, and other database-like constructs. But remember that the data set is stored locally and is in memory only. So this last button code down here is going to create the data set. So here I declare a data set. Think of this as an in-memory database. I'm declaring a table, like this shipper table here. And then I create what's called a data adapter. It's the data adapter's job to fill the table and to push the data back into the database. When I have this shipper data, I can then create a select command, which is like the command I created up here. And I'm saying, here's the select statement. Now, unlike up above, this data adapter can hold the select command, and it also can hold text for the update command, for the inserting of data, and for the deleting of data. So it can do all four of those operations. I'm doing the same thing down here with the product adapter. I'm creating a product. I'm saying select star from product. I'm adding the shippers table to the data set. I'm adding the products table to the data set. And then finally, I'm calling fill and say, here's the data set. Go out and get the data and put it inside the shippers table. My last step is to take the data from the products table and put it in the lists box via the data source property. Let's see if this works. Press F5, click the fill data set, and there's all our product names from the database. Now, as you can imagine, this is a lot of work. I'd have to create all of my data sets by hand. So there's a wizard that's part of Visual Studio that generates these data sets on my behalf. That's the topic of the next movie in this chapter.